Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar, Cultural Heritage Threats and the Role of Citizen Engagement Inside and Outside Universities. This is an outreach and community learning event of the INOS project. At &INOS project, also at web2learn_EU, and online at web2learn.eu. Today's event is open to amateurs and experts interested in how cultural heritage can be protected and preserved under extreme societal conditions, and how citizen engagement could be enhanced through cooperation between citizen communities and higher education institutions. Today's talks are focused on work being carried out by individuals and cultural organizations inside and outside Ukraine. We're not conducting a referendum on the war itself. That's beyond our skills and abilities here. Rather, we are together as a community trying to understand how the possibilities of both top-down and bottom-up action work in a time of crisis. What can citizens and conveners do to help preserve and share culture? We have, you don't have to be an expert in the field or a specialized researcher in the cultural sector to follow along today. Everyone's welcome to join. We have 5 tremendous speakers, Andreas Segerberg, Julia Pagel, Vasyl Rozhko, and Stefania Oikonomou, and Katerina Zourou from Web2Learn. We will do the speakers one at a time. Each speaker will speak for no more than 10 minutes. I'll be very strict with the time to keep things moving. And then at the end, we have about a half an hour budgeted for questions and discussion. If you have a question, hold it till the end and then put it in chat. Also, if you have trouble technically, need help, or also if you, if you have trouble, need help, a question, you can message Katerina or I, the co-hosts, directly, and we'll try and help you out. We are operating today under a code of conduct. Katerina will put that link in the chat now. These are cutting edge events. There's a lot at stake, and there are limits on what we can and can't discuss today, but basically be kind. And with no more formalities, I believe, we can go straight into the first talk. I think we're going to have a minute with Katerina to say a few words about the INOS project and the funder, and then we'll go to Julia. Katerina, go ahead and unmute, and the floor is yours.
I'm Katerina Zourou, and I'm going to do 2 short things with you. First is to present the project within which this webinar takes place, and the second is to link the project with the scope of today's webinar. I'm Katerina Zourou. I'm the head of Web2Learn and one of the initiators of the INOS project. This is an ongoing project led by the University of Aalborg in Denmark. The full title of INOS is Integrating Open and Citizen Science into Active Learning Approaches in Higher Education. 6 lovely partners, and I would like especially to thank Liber for being our communication expert today and forever. The motivation of INOS project is to push towards greater adoption of open and citizen science at universities and society at large. And we have 3 key objectives. Very quickly, it is about broadening open frameworks of collaboration beyond citizen science practices. It is about making teaching and learning practices much more rooted into open collaboration and open science together with society. And it's about a range of citizen science projects such as datathons, service jams, democracy workshops, knowledge cafes, fab labs, etc. And to connect the value of these beautiful citizen science initiatives to connectivity, learning potential, and capacity building inside and outside the universities. We have beautiful results. You're all very much invited to have a look at them. Of course, they are open access, totally in line with the INOS spirit. Today's webinar connects the power of citizen science, and it focuses more on citizen engagement by looking more particularly in cultural heritage preservation inside and outside universities. And we are very keen in discussing how cultural heritage protection and preservation can happen in challenging times by means of civic engagement. We take Ukrainian cultural heritage and the threat as the current context of this webinar. And now I will move on to the justification of this mindset of the willingness to bring forth the value of civic engagement into cultural heritage preservation. This is a very quick overview of a kind of radical blog post that I had the pleasure to co-author with my colleague Stefania. Oikonomou. So we see 4 barriers to action taking and 4 incentives for action taking in the current Ukrainian cultural heritage context. The 4 barriers that we see very quickly is first the overexposure to distressing media sources. People are overwhelmed by the intensity of images and videos from war, and some of them feel paralyzed and incapable of taking action to help those in need. The second is that despite our willingness to connect with colleagues and friends in Ukraine, the daily routines are so disrupted that we're having difficulties in connecting and in bonding and finding ways to collaborate into cultural heritage preservation and reuse. The third is this statement that because the conflict is ongoing and the end is unknown, this is used sometimes as a game stopper by some people. The fourth is that some people also label the Ukrainian war as highly sensitive, and that sometimes prevent people from dealing with that. So political debates can trap people and impact people action taking possibilities. So we see for incentives in action taking, the first that we see a tremendous value in technology and diaspora, in connecting people in and outside Ukraine, all sorts of backgrounds and profiles from the cultural sector to join forces to take action. The second is about a general statement about the power of activism and the value. We see an unprecedented spread of digital activism to support social purposes, especially in Ukraine. We think that there have been many acts of digital volunteering, and the webinar actually is all about that. The third is the universal role of culture in bridging dichotomies, and the fourth is the importance that we see in the immediacy and action. This is a very strong citations in our opinion from Andreas, that we had the pleasure to hear. If you don't act once, the material risks disappearing, the material, the archives and the digital assets in this sense. And of course, Andreas mentioned also Sebastian, both work in the Zourou project that Andreas just showcased. And that citation is also very important to us, where he explains why the immediacy of action was so needed, because when he was archiving, as Andreas was saying, night and day, these digital archives of Ukrainian cultural heritage, he realized that he was likely very quick into saving, because after some hours, the site has been bombarded, and the Ukrainian site, he lost the connection with the archive, but eventually he was successful in making a digital copy out of that. So we emphasize the immediacy and action into that. So very quickly, that is the point of the webinar. We believe in the agility, rapidity, and eagerness to act. It is very important also to bridge bottom-up and top-down initiatives from institutions. And now I will hand over also to Julia to tell us how institutions and cultural heritage organizations react to that together with bottom-up initiatives. And we think that technology expands the way citizens engage in a common cause as new forms of digital activism are being developed, especially in the cultural heritage preservation context. So thank you very much. I hand over to Mike.
Who will then hand over to Julia. Thank you, Katerina, very much for laying out the groundwork there. And for those of you who don't know, Katerina and Stefania's work and their team at Web2Learn, I recommend that you check it out. They're really actually quite on the cutting edge of events that are happening right now in the digital, physical, cultural, educational world. So thank you, Katerina, for having us all today. With Andreas Segerberg. Andreas is one of the 1,500 volunteers of the Zourou initiative, where he contributes with coordination and software development. When not working with Zourou, Andreas is a research engineer and lecturer in digital curation at the University of Gothenburg, or Göteborg, in Sweden. Thank you and welcome, Andreas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Just making sure that you can see my presentation. Okay.
Looks great.
Thank you. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about Zourou, which is or became a global community of volunteers with the aim to help to preserve Ukraine's online cultural heritage. I'm going to start this talk with a timeline. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal involvement and how the group Zourou came into be. So, of course, on February the 24th, we had the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. My background is from academia, and I've had a long interest in web archiving, technology methods, and so forth. So I had a background in those things. So the full-scale invasion started on the 24th. On the same day, I did, together with just a very loose group of people that I know, in panic started to targeting and saving the most obvious sites, like the president site, like the big culture governmental sites. And you could see now in retrospective, we can see that there were a lot of people that was trying to do stuff on their own. So there were a lot of people who tried to use the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to archive to a function that is called Save Page Now, where you can put in a link and it will be saved into the Wayback Machine. And this little image here is a small example of the president's site, and you can see that it gets a lot of intensity and a lot of people is in there and trying to save stuff. Also, we had the International Council of Museums called on civil society in Ukraine to assist their local museums and to protect their holdings. And this was for locals within Ukraine. Obviously, I would say that they had probably other things to think about than this, but nevertheless, there was a call. Another initiative is the archive team, who did major website crawls with a crowdsourced computing power that's called Warrior. Don't think I have the time to speak too much about that. So where did we start? How from this first day we only did like the most obvious stuff, but then we tried to figure out, okay, how can we figure out stuff from a country that I know very little of. I know like the capital's name, the president's name, but not so much more. So we used Wikidata as a source. So we queried for official governmental sites that were in Wikipedia, and we tried to extract the official website URL. And this was on the day after, and then we managed to extract like 1,300 URLs from these Wikipedia articles. On February the 26th, we finally got some contact with the Ukrainian authorities, and it was still, you know, I called a friend and a friend of a friend, finally know someone in Ukraine, and gave me the phone number, and we got in contact on WhatsApp, and they helped us a lot to identify and prioritize the most important websites. On February the 28th, Sebastian Majstrovich, who has a background in digital humanities and is a PhD candidate in history, and has a background, he's from the former Yugoslavia and has experienced damage to the cultural heritage by war. He laid sleepless one night after and thinking about how to save the digital heritage. So he put out this tweet that, you know, got a very good spread, and within a few days several hundred volunteers joined to try to save as much as possible from the Ukrainian museums, archives, libraries, galleries, and so forth. I'm not going to dwell into too much detail here, but here's a basic, you will have the presentation afterwards, and it's going to be links and some text that you can read. But this is the basic workflow, and I'm going to, in the next few slides, just talk a little bit about the roles of Zourou. And the power is in the number of people. That's a key thing. And there is a task suitable for anyone, regardless of their tech skills. So people were link collectors, collecting links, trying to find, you know, stuff to archive, new museums. We have those who use the Internet Archive's batch processing service, where you could basically put a lot of URLs in a Google Sheet and it will be ingested to the Internet Archive. We have people who do manual recording of where we can't put a web crawler, and then you need a human being to, so to speak, interact with the web page to capture. This is an archaeology site of some sort that you can go in, and that's a necessity for archiving those complex sites. We have those who work with metadata curating. We have those who actively archive the web. Some sites, and this is the thing that I've been doing the most of the time, is being targeting the really difficult stuff that needs custom scripting and stuff. We have people that do situation monitoring, and they try to focus and see how the war is developing and helping the collectors and the other people to prioritize what content that needs to be saved first. For instance, if we see that there are shellings in one part of Ukraine, we have to focus on that part. Here's some statistics just for fun. We average on 4 million saved pages a day between, this only goes from mid-March to the end of March, but I would say we had the same during the whole of April as well. So about 4 million pages saved to the Internet Archive a day. We have these numbers: 40 terabytes of scanned documents, artworks, and other digital materials. And this special collection that focused on governmental websites, over 6,500 websites are now safeguarded. And the archive team, they have done more broad-scoped collections of the top domain and some news and TV broadcasts. So, some lessons learned. Open data has been absolutely essential for the success for this. We have used zone files for trying to identify domains and subdomains. Wikidata, as I mentioned before. OpenStreetMaps for locating, for instance, where museums are, and from there we could extract, URLs and so forth. So one thing with this is with this community of people, obviously all of us, we work in institutions, but Zourou, we are so non-gov that we can't even be a non-gov. And which could be troublesome sometimes if we want to apply for fundings and stuff like that, because we are not an official non-gov. But we do a lot of things. And we one key thing of not being an institution is that we could act very, very quickly without any bureaucracy. So some of the next steps, I know that my time is running out, but I just want to mention that the next steps, when we have done this huge amount of collecting of the online materials, we are now doing some coordination of donations of digitizations equipment that will be sent into Ukraine for further digitization. And we also are seeking for long-term partnership with the institutions that could take care of the collected material and the storage and the management for how long it's going to be needed. And with that, I say thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Andreas. That was terrific. And go ahead and unshare your screen. And I know I'm going to have a couple of questions to you for you in the Q&A, particularly about the use of Internet Archive as a piece of infrastructure. Now to Julia Pagel. Julia is the Secretary General of NEMO, the Network of European Museum Organizations. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself and NEMO in her talk. Julia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. First of all, let me try and check whether the PowerPoint shares with you.
Perfect.
It looks perfect. That is great. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Mike, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about NEMO's initiative with European museums to support the Ukrainian colleagues. Before I start my presentation, as Mike has already said, I would like to introduce NEMO just super briefly to you. We're a network representing and working for the museum community in Europe. We have 130 members in 40 countries. And just to give you a main idea of what we're doing, we do a lot of advocacy for museums vis-a-vis policymakers, mostly European institutions, European policymakers. We initiate international cooperation between museums, help museums to work on European level, attract European funding. We act as information platform to share good practices and information, and we offer capacity building to our museum professionals in Europe on all matters relevant to museum work. Now, and having said this, quick realities check to give you an idea about the actual organization that represents 30,000 museums in Europe with a large activity portfolio. We are an organization of 8 staff members and only one of them working full-time, and that's me. So much for the resources and capacities to facilitate cooperation and exchange within the sector at European level. I actually want to put an emphasis on that, size versus ambition and scope. I think when it comes to cultural heritage institutions and NGOs like ours in Europe, we're not an exception in terms of size and resources. Actually, most of the cultural sector organizations in Europe are regarded as so-called micro businesses with less than 10 staff. And while this might be a disadvantage when it comes to creating big impact, I think there is an undeniable advantage, and that is being quick and uncomplicated and without an administrative nightmare to overcome when it comes to taking decisions. And in this connection, and here I'm really echoing what Andreas has said before, I want to raise another point, which I think it's important. It starts with a quote, "It's all about people." And this comes from the founder of NEMO, Frank Birkebach. This was actually among the first things I learned from him. And back then, when I was new at the organization, I was thinking, what is he talking about? We are a network of organizations, actually umbrella organizations. We are not a network of individual people. But then in the years till now, I realized that he was completely right from the start, because it doesn't help you per se to be connected on paper to UNESCO or 30 national museum organizations or the European Parliament. It's about seeing the people behind the organization, or rather seeing the organization as a conglomerate of people and identifying their shared objectives and values. And this is what gets things rolling. And coming back to this specific situation now in Ukraine with the war in Europe, it is extremely important to speak and appeal to these people in their individual capacities as colleagues and citizens, and to activate them and get active beyond their comfort zone or maybe job description. So I want to tell you how we got into getting active. Maybe first, what about the process? This relates very much to our ability as a small organization to make decisions quickly. My colleague from the Netherlands contacted me on February 25th in conjunction with our statement on the war in Ukraine. She told me that various colleagues in Europe had already contacted her, asking for more information coordination. The next call was from a colleague in Portugal who asked how they could help their colleagues in Ukraine. And that was the start of our initiative. We realized that some kind of coordination platform for the office was needed. And so we organized a call through our network and partners via all possible channels to European museums and institutions. And we organized a special page on our website, organized different categories of possible support. And we started collecting and monitoring the activities sent to us. Purpose of the initiative is, next to supporting Ukraine, we wanted this page to inspire and maybe encourage more colleagues from all over Europe to do something, because even the smallest gesture is a start. And I think another advantage is of this collection is that it's a proof for us in the future that we can be agile. And museums can take a stand. And sometimes we all know that museums give us the impression that they don't. So since we launched the call, we've had 150 museum colleagues messaging us, sending their initiatives or getting information from us. And in the following, I just want to run through, because I know I'm restricted on time, through some of the initiatives that we were sent. Obviously, a lot of museums called us, providing storage spaces and housing for refugees, especially in the first weeks. A lot of museums contacted us for these matters. We have received different kinds of donation initiatives, next to many museums donating earnings from ticket sales. Some museums organized events to raise money, like charity auctions or concerts, helping to collect foods and goods and medical and hygiene supplies. We've received diverse support initiatives in the area of education and exhibitions, museums offering language courses for Ukrainian refugees or giving guided tours through museums and the new towns, organizing exhibitions about war, Russia, the invasion, and propaganda. A lot of museums and funding organizations have created job opportunities for Ukrainian colleagues coming to Europe, creating scholarships or research fellowships for them. And I think the most recent support initiatives focus on how to help the colleagues and collections in Ukraine on the ground. And we'll hear more about that from Vasyl, I guess, later on. So instead of bringing cultural heritage from Ukraine to a safe space outside, it's actually about helping them on the ground there. And that also goes for sharing experience with documentation, digitization, and inventory of Ukrainian collections. Yeah, this just as an idea and quick summary of how of some of the offers that we've had. We had 5,000 visits on our webpage last month and high attention on our social media channels. And I think that shows the interest and also the need for coordination because there are so many initiatives working parallelly. And maybe talking about crisis moments and the war in Ukraine now being the most extreme and intense crisis currently, I think it makes sense to really look back at other crises and what we might have learned from them. And there's a very recent one, the COVID-19 pandemic, which heavily impacted on the museum sector globally. And I think what we've learned from this one is that we can be flexible, actually more flexible than most of us think in their everyday life. The fact that within a week in the war, the first supporting offers were underway and new actions in museums were born out of present needs really gives me hope that we are, after all, prepared for an uncertain future. And I think another learning is that in crisis, we really have to stick together. And with NEMO, we have witnessed that during the pandemic, and again now during the war, the need for museums to get in touch with each other, with their peers, to exchange about next steps and how-tos, and to create a stronger voice was really immense. And networks are an important platform for that. Yeah, so much for our initiative, successful so far, but there are a lot of unanswered and uncomfortable questions that I have not included in my presentations because I don't have a full answer to them, but I look forward to discussing them with you. I think for one, there's the question about how long the initiative will run. Is that like an endless initiative? And this question is connected to how much media attention is influencing the willingness to help on a general level, and now in our case for the heritage sector. We, for example, have noticed that the peak of offers for support was provided in March, April until mid-May, and then gradually declined from, say, 10 offers per week to 1 or 2 per week. And I think a reason clearly is that media attention has turned elsewhere. But we also know, and that's promising, that a lot of contacts between museums and professionals have now been established, and the collaboration is happening now without us as a coordinating entity. And that, in the end, is the original idea of a network. There is no center. There are just network members being connected and working together on a basis of a shared vision and mission. So somehow mission accomplished. I'm going to end my presentation here on this positive note, although I think that these questions are still open. Look forward to discussing them with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. That was terrific. Our next speaker is Vasyl Rozhko. Vasyl is the head of the Tuston NGO. He does heritage site management and crisis management, also digital heritage documentation and preservation/presentation. Vasyl, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Hello to everybody. Do you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for this opportunity, Katerina. It's not only possibility to tell about Ukraine today, but also to live with Andreas Segerberg and Julia, which helped us a lot. We connected with NEMO. So I will tell a few words about Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, and I try to accent on questions you mentioned about role of citizens and initiatives from below, and some lessons learned. So first of all, it's a volunteer initiative of museums, and first of all, Maidan Museum and Tuston NGO. So we are museum workers, architects, museologists, and we started this as our part of war while we are in comparatively safely placed in Western Ukraine. For example, before in previous life, I took care of Tuston site. We did 3D and take care and belonged to sustainability, and all those ability to work with heritage understanding we took to HERI initiative. It's a part of our expertise. So we have different levels of goals. First of all, to have capacity to act, but also partly to act now to do some urgent things, but also to do something for future, which will last and after the war, and which will change our heritage system, which partly is post-Soviet, and it's a great problem and low possibility to react because of its not reforming state after Soviet Union. So we feel a lot help of world in materials, money for urgent needs, for people, for materials to pack artifacts and to hide them. So it's first block of activity, but we started in different areas, and I will return to the slide. So we also think about a center for rescue center with a team which will be able to react. So now it's some separate activities, but it will be the huge direction in future with regional offices, because firstly we started in Lviv, then in Kyiv also the second, and we dream that in each big city, in Dnipro, Kharkiv, Odessa will be the center for reaction. Other work is to build integrated data infrastructure, and that's why scanning archives paper, I mean, and documenting 3D in 3D heritage are the database for this, and rescue expeditions also a part of our activity to damaged heritage. But also education is important, to manual what to do, trainings, databases for actions. So just to hotline to ask questions of museum workers what to do, and also communication is important to change system. And always we connect with R&D and analytics, because I'll show you, for example, we did. I have possibility to share my screen, so I will show you live. Now the best, do you see the texts?
Yes.
Yes.
So for now, there are many initiatives to document heritage, but the best is now on Ministry of Culture site. So it's verified. And on this basis, we not to duplicate, we started to do GIS. So we put all museums, because 8 years ago I did this registry in the ministry. So 2,500 of Ukrainian museums we put into GIS, and with the line of fire, because the news about damages are only the part of problem. We know that there are much more objects left there with collections, and besides 140,000 objects of immovable heritage. So with this internal GIS, we can research all period line of fire, and to understand the whole territory under occupation, for further verification, inventory of each part. So rockets, missiles are the damages heritage, and it's a part of my responsibility in HERI, because Igor Poshivailo, I think, well known to you, is take care of some other things. But also we started
and a webinar.
I'll show you another part. So also interesting, important thing is rescue expeditions to damaged objects. It started suddenly to Borodyanka. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
So it's a famous Borodyanka shell. We understood that we can lose it in a few days because of weather, and so we decided to rescue it to museum collection for further generations. But before we should fix this, so we did 3D detailed 3D model with the help of photogrammetry, and also the model of the whole buildings around this. And these expeditions became complex. We understood that we should gather some artifacts, for example, toys or uniform of occupants or some other things for future generations. We also took oral histories and documented with the help of ICROM methodics assessment on site on 8 pages about structural stability and other things. And so after this, we started to do this constantly. And the next expedition was to the wooden church to Vyazivka. Do you see the picture?
Yes.
So it's in Zhytomyr region, and what's interesting is that it's a Russian church. And in Kharkiv was the next level of our expeditions, because we could do this with the help already of local specialists, museum workers and architects, and workers of security service. On the basis of our material, started criminal proceedings. Do you see the video or not?
Yes.
Proceedings on the basis of this work. So I return to my slides. Sorry, I lost my
That's okay.
oh, here. Okay. So about cooperation. Cooperation is on different levels. First of all, with other initiatives, Ukrainian and international. There are many, so specialization is important, because, for example, when Oля Gonchar speaks about money for salaries for people, then we try to do something other. And for cooperation, also platforms are important. And after first months of helping with materials, we did with ICOM Ukraine and Promuseum platform together, one platform to get information from museums, because we know that some museums ask for a few times different initiatives, and some do not get anything. And this platform will also be important, I think, to donors and to report. But the other cooperation is this ministry, so it's important to speak with, to try to help with their capacity, and to build vision of future, and to speak about this. And sustainability is our result, we hope. So there are many challenges. It's hardly to think during war, you know, but it's very important to think, because we are lack of resources, of mental resources, and emotions are high. And it's very important to think how to use this, not big resources of people, first of all. and challenges knowledge management because there are many data of situation of possibilities which you provide, which internal are and with local situation. So it's a challenge to cooperate, to combine self-coordination, self-organization with coordination. So it's a balance challenge. And that possibilities become huge and challenges. So it's parallel. And finishing my presentation, a war is a pain and suffering, but also it can become a possibility to jump and to do something that we didn't have before. And that's why we try to think about building something that will stay after the war and will make a heritage system stronger than before. Thank you. And here are some details in the report and Facebook.
And we'll put those links into chat and also into follow-up communication on the Web to Learn site for people in the chat who are looking for more information. Thank you, Vasyl. It's very hard to move to another speaker after that. So with a deep breath, we'll move to Katerina and Stefania's talk, and then come back to you and others in the questions and answers. But thank you very much for sharing all of that with us today. Katerina and Stefania, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. I'm gonna do slide sharing. I think you can see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, so hi everyone. Today we are also focusing on how citizens can engage in the protection and preservation of Ukrainian cultural heritage. And so let's get right into the theme. So when we talk about citizen engagement, we talk about how we want to understand how citizens can be agents of change in their communities. Of course, nowadays, digital tools and technologies can empower people to take action for cultural heritage preservation. And of course, put people in this process, make them feel more the value of engaging for their community's cultural heritage. Of course, there are several forms of technology-mediated citizen engagement. We have digital humanitarians, internet activists, digital volunteers, people coming from many different sectors, from citizen science, social computing, citizen journalism, etc. Here you can see our collection on Padlet. It's a collection of initiatives that were carried out to help protect and preserve Ukrainian cultural heritage. Initiatives carried out by cultural heritage organizations, higher education institutions in Europe, and of course, citizen communities. So I'll briefly present you three of such initiatives. The first one is the Backup Ukraine initiative, which is set up by Polycam in partnership with the Blue Shield Denmark, UNESCO and Virtue Futures Innovation Lab. So the goal here is to gather in an open access repository 3D models of Ukrainian cultural assets. And what is of great importance here is that ordinary citizens are actively engaged in this process because they can scan and then store as 3D models the cultural assets, the pictures they take from cultural monuments on the ground. And another initiative that is based on collective, participatory, and an open innovation approach is the Translate a Story Ukraine initiative that is organized by UNESCO in collaboration with many other partners. This initiative was firstly launched during the pandemic to serve as a tool to enhance remote early age reading. So in this case, this initiative aims to translate early grade books into Ukrainian through crowdsourcing, which entails a joint work carried out by volunteers all around the world. And the third initiative is about some actions taken by the NEMO Museum in Lithuania. The NEMO Museum has organized a series of activities to support the Ukrainian cultural sector. Among the most important of them are the Ukrainian poetry readings and the museum's crowdfunding initiatives. Of course, we have also uploaded our collection on GitHub, so it can be freely accessible to anyone to consult. So among all these several initiatives carried out to protect and preserve Ukrainian cultural heritage are hackathons. So a hackathon is a digital and participatory action that aims to provide quick and effective solutions to social problems. A hackathon lasts for 2 or 3 days, and it's a great opportunity to enhance citizens' digital skills while also foster cooperation and collective action towards a commonly set goal. So we at Web2Learn, we are organizing a hackathon for Ukrainian cultural heritage currently under threat. Our hackathon challenge will take place in the context of the EU Space for Ukraine Hackathon Initiative that is organized by the European Union Agency for the Space Program. This hackathon will run from the 29th of June and it will last till the 1st of July. And it will entail the use of Earth observation data for humanitarian aid. So a few words about our hackathon challenge. In our challenge, we'll use Earth observation and space data to monitor threats and damage in Ukrainian cultural heritage. So it will be a challenge in which both citizens and professionals will come together, work with data, and finally release results in an open access format. We'll use Earth observation and space data freely accessible by European systems Galileo and Copernicus. So to achieve our challenge goal, we need people coming from a diverse professional backgrounds to engage in a joint 3 days effort. Of course, technology and digital tools will support experts and citizens on the ground to take action, both on site and remotely. We need experts in Earth observations, like people coming from the GEOS International Scholar community, but as well, we need experts in cultural heritage, both in Ukraine and abroad. So if you're working in the cultural heritage sector, or you're a cultural enthusiast, or you're an Earth observation data expert, and this hackathon challenge seems interesting to you, you can email us, and we'll share with you all information related to our hackathon challenge and let you know how you can be part of it. And just a few words about our coming INOS webinar on the 7th of July. We are glad to host scientists to talk about academic activism. We host Gianluca Grimalda and Laura Horn from the Scientist Rebellion team. We also host Luigi Ceccaroni, an expert in citizen science, and Jaume Piera, an expert in marine observation data. And of course, we'll have together with us Katerina, Zourou, and Michael Peter Edson. So see you there also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefania. I think now we'll move into a question, dialogue, discussion. If you have questions out there among the participants, go ahead and put them into chat. And I think all of the panelists, but mostly Katerina and Stefania and I will try and pull things up and recast the questions to our speakers today. I have one very immediate question that I think is probably on the mind of almost everyone in the room, and I want to go speaker by speaker, starting in the same order we went, starting with you, Andreas. If people want to know what to do, what I as an individual can do, can you point us to some place to start? First to you, Andreas.
Well, that's a very hard question, I guess.
Oh, actually, so let me. You're all thoughtful people, but let me start with a question about that. Why is that a hard question? Not a question to you. It is a hard question.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard in our sector?
Maybe one thing that I've been thinking about, and that I wanted to have, before this, was like I wanted to know people from Ukraine. Why didn't I know people in Ukraine? Why didn't, and other things that have come to my mind, why didn't I act in Syria? Why didn't I act in other conflict areas? Maybe lack of contacts, maybe, I don't know, but that's something that has crossed my mind many times. Why haven't I done this before? And I think this is something that we really can, you know, make a lesson of, that we need to work more with networking. I think that's one very essential thing.
That's a beautiful answer. But and then the second part of the question, what and let me put it, to give you time to think, put it in some context. Back when I was working with a UN project, we had this phenomenon we called the "so what" phenomenon. So what do I do? A bunch of us went to see Ai Weiwei's film during the migration crisis, Human Flow. And we all got very emotionally involved in that movie, and we left the movie theater and we looked at each other and go, now, so what the F are we supposed to do? So I'm been curious about this for a long time. Is there a listserv we can join, a website we should follow, a friend we should make?
Yeah, you should, if you're interested in Suture's work. Right now, we are basically, what you could say, done with the collecting the online digital heritage that was posted online. So that part is really done, but please keep an eye on Suture's website. It's going to be a press release within a few weeks, where we're going to talk about the next steps, where we're going forward with more equipment donation and donation of training materials, or training time, consulting time for Ukrainian GLAMs. So keep an eye on that. But I think everyone needs to, you know, think of what can I do, and that was what I did when when this all happened. I mean, I don't have a driver's license. I'm afraid of guns. I don't know anything about medical healthcare, but I do know a lot about web archiving. So, so I think people who can drive a bus should do that. And people, so if you're good at something, you know, think about if you can make it to something useful for people in need.
Wow, beautifully said. Julia, what are your thoughts about this from your position?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that you're mentioning the networks, because I think this is one of the most important aspects, is that you actually have these communication channels, some kind of channel that gives you the access to the actual people. And in our case, we had to, because we have only one member in Ukraine, and this is not an umbrella organization, so just one museum. So we needed to contact our colleagues in Georgia, who gave us the contact to Harry, for example, to Vasyl, and other colleagues. So we needed to go to Georgia first in order to come to Ukraine, but it took us one email. And I think this is maybe also a value that you don't always use, this network, because unfortunately crises don't come up every day, but only every second day. At least that's my impression in the last years. And having these communication channels is a value, and even better if you don't have to use them all the time. But if you have to use them, then they're there and the trust is already there. So I don't have any hesitation to call my colleague in Georgia and ask her whether she knows somebody who's good and reliable in Ukraine. And I trust her 100% that the names and contacts that she's going to give me are good. And I think this is super valuable. And then also to second what Andreas has said, for us as a network with little resources, really small resources, we are also not driving the truck. but we have a strong network. So we have the reach to museums in Europe. So what the obvious thing for us to do is to kind of pool what our members and the larger network is presenting to us and trying to structure it. Because as we've seen, there are so many parallel initiatives that, you know, if you want to get some kind of information, you have to look at 10 websites in parallel. So I think we're doing good with what we do, and that is keeping an overview and kind of, you know, arranging so people can get active with whatever kind of means and resources they have.
Yeah, well said. Vasyl.
I have three parts of response.
Yeah.
But firstly, I wanted to say sorry, because I feel we use only a part of possibilities that you provide. I tell to Julia and to the whole of Europe, we are overwhelmed too much of messages, of Gmails, and we have low capacity to answer everything and parallel to work. So sorry, but in time we will do this. I think the question has three levels, and first of all, a level of security. You know, heritage is part of culture, and culture is about creativity. It's very hard to create under danger. So even people in Western Ukraine or abroad from Ukraine cannot create as before, thinking about souls under fire, and it's very hard to take you in hands and to work, and many things that they should be there and fight, but no, they do not have those skills, and they just are sitting and reading, and so security is very important, and it's hard to work without this. Secondly, the lack of resources, mental resources, and when you are in thoughts, you are there, and with your wife or husband or children under fire, you want to do something immediately, and it is very hard to tell somebody who come to you and tell, oh, I want to work, tell me what to do. You know, it's hardly to think for one more people what to do. And so subjectivity is very important, just to show the vision and take your part of work and do, because I have lack of resources to to tell everybody, 100 volunteers, what to do. You know, it's no time for this. So very important to have in team. It can be a small team, but with people who are able to take responsibility and to make strong decisions in these realities we have. Not waiting for tomorrow, not saying, oh, if the ministry did this, but just we have this reality, and we do what we can. This was the second level of subjectivity and responsibility of everybody and of active people. And it's also, I think, very important is the network of trust. You know, you have no time for mistake. You cannot ask everybody if it's very important. If, for example, it's about evacuation of museum collections of something or some dangerous place or something else, you should work with those whom you know that when it's about people's life or health. And the third level is, I think that something very interesting is happening now, and of course Ukraine has some part of post-Soviet legacy and system problems from Soviet Union. But I think that many things in which world lived for years, they are damaged. with the start of this war, and many things didn't work. That doesn't work anymore. Do not work. And I think it's a place where some new innovations, not only in economy or culture or creativity appear, but also in management, in understanding, and maybe even in senses. So I think we also can be useful, and we also can be a place to test something new and some kind of R&D. Thank you.
Vasyl, let me ask a follow-up question on that, because that's a very mind-expanding idea. Can you say a little bit more about what kinds of innovations, you put the word management into that sentence, what sort of areas of innovation or change you imagine could happen through and as a result of the war? Give us a more specific idea of that, what you're thinking of when you think of that.
I try to do this shortly. It could be a theme of another meeting. But on technical level, you know, it's about, for example, during the start of the war 8 years ago, we had no information about museum collections in Kyiv, only in museums. And we should do this very quickly to gather information. We have no politician power for this, no money for this. So in very short period, we managed to get photocopy of inventory books, you know. For example, today it's, for example, horizontal communication, and so not vertical. You shouldn't wait that ministry will tell you, especially about evacuation or some complex decisions, because then it stops and nothing appears. You take responsibility, you do something, you communicate to coordinate, and this balance and horizontal links are very, very important, and I think it's our strength about Russia, when all society became active and start to do to find their niche and to do what they can, and it's hardly to destroy, because there are no center, no one center. You destroy this and in another place appears. But I think that the main thing is more higher. Many people couldn't believe that it can be in 21st century, you know. Yes. And when we talk about the culture as a thing which make us people, so which culture let country destroy the others? What is this? What's the culture is this? It's a kind of barbarian culture, you know, and it's hardly to understand, and it's in everything, and it's hardly to change the in mind, when many years it was about something other, and discourses was so you know, and we should rethink what is Ukrainian culture, what humanity is put in our icons, in our sacral architecture, in our Middle Ages art, you know. It's something more than just drawings, paintings. It's about humanity, attitude to everything. I don't know how to say it shortly, but
this is your moment. So thank you. Thank you for trying, Vasyl.
You can continue later.
Yeah, no, it will be an ongoing conversation for sure. And I'm thinking to go to Stefania for a moment. In the thinking and research that you've been doing as part of the INOS project and getting to know people in projects who are working on these bottom-up and top-down cultural initiatives. It's a hard question, but on my mind is, are you beginning to see some hints at maybe an alternative way of managing or thinking about what cultural activity is beyond traditional institutions and organizations?
Oh, well, what I can say from some months of research on the topic, I think that people now talk more about citizen engagement, and that's not just to say and like a beautiful phrase, but it has also a more deep meaning, because we need citizens both on the ground and abroad to be engaged, and not only about providing data. Okay, that's understandable, and that's the first thing we're thinking about, but also engage after in the post-conflict scenario and being actively engaged in their communities as well. So I'm thinking about a more broad paradigm shift in attitudes and changes also in society and individuals. So what I'm experiencing these months, I think that we have come to a point where citizens realizing what they can do, that they can be agents of change, but obviously they always need support and guidance. So I think that bottom up and bottom down should be always how to say interconnected and go together to achieve what is our ultimate goal here.
I'm interested in that very much. And Katerina, do you want a piece of this action before I go to the next question?
Yes, very quickly. When a war breaks out, we immediately think about humanitarian aid in the sense of emergency, but it is valuable that here we look at the cultural heritage sector, which sometimes stays neglected when societies think about a war, and our contribution here, I mean, of the community of cultural heritage is very important, because we do something for a sector that sometimes in a war seems not vital, but it is vital. So it's a contribution to that, and all this social participation, citizen engagement is so crucial.
I'm listening to you all through this whole session, and when I first started coming to Europe to work, a project that Julie and I are both on an advisory board for, Europeana, a digital cultural initiative of the European Commission, it was explained to me that the genesis of that organization was that a few European commissioners thought it would be a good idea if digital cultural people met more often from across Europe, so that we wouldn't have World War III. That was at the root of the explanation for why it's worth flying people around and meeting each other and talking about culture, was to prevent and perhaps to respond to cultural stress. And I've thought about that many times as I've flown over to Europe over the last 10 or 15 years. And because of your comments, Vasyl and Andreas and Julia and Stefania and Katerina, I'm really seeing the wisdom in that, having that network and those connections and that trust be present across the cultural community so that it can be used when needed. But on that note, maybe Julia, a question that's been on my mind for you as I've been listening is, you're in the middle of a 30,000 European museum institutions every day. And this digital revolution, so-called, has been washing over that sector for years. And so many of the ideas that I've heard spoken about today, I think carry with them an intrinsically digital set of ideas about who can connect and who can speak and who can participate and who can lean in to be a part of a problem or part of work as citizens. And I'm wondering how you think the cultural sector, how far the museum sector has gone in kind of embracing that spirit of the original vision of the World Wide Web.
Yeah. let's say with the pandemic, a lot changed. And I think that, again, in these crisis moments, when you don't have any other means to do it otherwise, then you suddenly realize, oh yeah, digital is not so bad after all. But we are all humans and we all are very resistant to change. So I feel the museum sector is very slow, say, in adapting digital understanding, maybe, because this is across all sectors. It's not about digital communication. It's about using digital in every aspect of work, basically, across the organization. There is still a lot to do. And Mike, you were mentioning Europeana, this European platform for digital cultural heritage. And if you look at the actual, not user numbers, but the ones that provide information, so digital data, this is still very limited. So I'd say there is still room for improvement, but we are on a good way. But having said this, and this comes rather from the experience of the network, I feel that having digital meetings and also finding digital great ways of interacting with each other was super helpful during the 2 years. But I also realized that everything new was actually based, new ideas, new projects, new corporations, actually based on something that had happened before in person. So the basis is, for me at least, but maybe I'm a dinosaur and the next generation is probably going to be way more flexible with that. But I feel that this spark of inspiration still is based on something that's called trust. And for me, it's more difficult to kind of make this trust happening on a digital level, at least when it starts there. Is that an answer to your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And never a complete answer, because it's a big, complex question, but certainly a set of gestures about this moment that we're living in. And Andreas, I thought that you spoke very clearly and eloquently about just the native participatory opportunity that's available in the world now, and the ability to contribute a variety of skills. And I wanted to speak about that in any way you want, but I did want to ask you a specific question about kind of like the ancient gospels of open platforms, Internet Archive, OpenStreetMap, and how much these platforms allowed you to do, or what the problems with them were as you tried to make important things happen in Ukraine.
Yeah. I can start off. It's kind of hooked on to what Julia was talking about the digital transformation of society or whatever. But one thing that has struck me is that we are 1,500 people, and we organize through a Slack channel. It's not an open source, but it's a free to use community platform for chatting and placing stuff in channels and so forth. And the actual work is done in a Google spreadsheet. You just think about that for a minute. We are 1,500 people editing a Google spreadsheet at the same time. It's the global access, because that was the only way to actually make it happen. And it works, which is totally insane. I mean, I have difficulties, keeping track with myself, basically. If I share a document with myself, it gets all messed up. But something had to do with, we shared something, this community. We had a very basic common knowledge domain of the cultural heritage, and that was, plenty enough. But I can also speak about a little bit about the Internet Archive. Why do we use Internet Archive? Well, it's a global access and an open platform. It doesn't cost anything. It's known. It's somewhat trusted, I would say, even though we have to all hope for that Brewster Kahle, the founder of Internet Archive, doesn't go evil, not being evil. Have to sign up to that trademark. But that was one, you know, it's open, it's useful, they are good people working there. But we're also seeking for, since we are a community of individuals, of course, we work at the institution and can, you know, make use of resources that we have in time, for instance. We can, I have time donated by my employer, for instance. They say, oh, well, we understand that you have a massive backlog now, but we do what you do, because it's good that you do it. But we need, since we are holding a lot of data that can potentially be very valuable, we need some sustainability in the long term for that, because now we are relying on Amazon being generous, and they are very generous. But for how long are they going to be generous? We don't know. So I think, you know, this like civil society doing stuff needs to be, you know, connected to institutions, to and I think that was, if I didn't understand it wrong, but I think that's a little bit what Stefania was mentioning too, that you need to have a connection between individuals and this kind of community work, and to make it long lasting and safeguarding, in this case, the material for long term, we need to have some sort of partnership. But I mean, I think we have the time to let the bureaucracy have its time, because we can safeguard it for as long as the bureaucracy needs. But I mean, we got contacted by, I'm not going to mention who, but there were big institutions that reached out to Zourou and asking, hey, we are maybe thinking of, you know, doing something, and perhaps we're going to archive the web as well. And they, you know, contact us, you know, 2 months into the war, and we was like, yeah, kind of late, you know.
Yeah, well, and that, yeah, I'm listening to you speak. I'm very cognizant of this problem with digitality that most of us have recognized over the last 5 or 10 years, which is the hollowing out of the concept of a digital public sphere, particularly within culture, particularly within state. In the States, we've ceded a lot of the responsibility for core societal cultural functions to corporate-owned third-party initiatives. And within Europe, from the European Commission, there's a very strong sense now that the European Union ought to reclaim the public ownership of a lot of that public sphere. That is a topic for another discussion, the pros and cons of that vision, because it's not an easy formula. But Vasyl, with a few minutes running down towards the end of our webinar and scanning the chat messages to see if there are any questions from the audience, Vasyl, I kind of wanted to ask you, as the last remarks, to give some advice to your colleagues here and the participants who are fortunate enough to not have their countries torn apart by war at the moment, and what should they be focusing on to ensure that they're in a better position to not to do well for their cultures in a time of great change and crisis? It's a big question. Feel free to speak about anything you want to talk about to close up, but that question is on my mind.
So a question about advices about culture, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're we have, many of us think we have the luxury to plan and take our time to prepare. There's a great quote about the climate emergency that when it comes to climate, winning slowly is the same as losing. another quote from Stefan Zweig, who wrote that his recollection of World War II was that there seemed to be a large window in which it was possible to act, and then how quickly and suddenly that window could be closed. So I'm thinking about the people in this room and the potential for a life-changing emergency in anyone's life and culture at any moment. And perhaps asking you fairly or unfairly to reflect a bit on what we ought to be doing in our lives and our work and our careers now, with the awareness that things could turn very difficult very quickly.
Got questions and little time. So first reflection is, we have still traditions in Ukraine, and we sing carols during Christmas. We go from house to house before COVID, of course. And we play special games on Easter, and it's a part of culture which I think we have this part bigger than in Western Europe, I think, because of globalization and other things. But I think it's very important, and each nation, each country has its own traditions, and this part of culture is cannot be put into children in other way than example. So it's only when you believe and you do this, and your children or others see this, they will continue this after your death. And during Soviet times, it was forbidden, and everybody did this. Special people looked after to say about this to KGB, to security service of Soviet Union. But in spite of everything, people sing carols, went to church, and when Ukraine became independent 30 years ago, everything was altered, but people start to do this less. But I think that you should do this. Any tradition that you have, it's important. In spite of globalization, there is something, I think it's this variety, which is part of innovation. So when we are in design thinking on other ways of creating, variety is a possibility to do something unexpected, some synergy that cannot be, you cannot think about this before. It just appear during interaction, but this interaction should be with dignity and with, so it's the first moment. And I think that we should think about memory is important. We should think who we are, because the war in Ukraine, it's not the war for territory or for some, so it's a war against our heritage, about not to let Ukraine and Ukrainians be as a state, as an independent culture. So it's a war against culture. And I suppose that you should think about this, because there are a variety of cultures, and Ukrainian culture differs, but still thinking more generalized, it's a European culture. And we have a lot of common things. And this culture of Russia is other culture. It's Asian and it differs. And I think that we fight not only for our country, but for some values which are common with Europe. And here something bigger is defined than only our country's life, I think you can think about this, that it's maybe more important than just Ukrainian people lives. It's a part of our great war, and you can think also about your cultures, about things about which we didn't talk before and didn't think that it can be in 21st century.
Okay. Those are the last words today, Vasyl. Thank you so much.
I should stop because it cannot be completed. So
you gave us, that was very, as throughout, beautifully done. And I personally, and I think all the attendees here are very grateful to you for opening up to us today. Katerina, Stefania, Julia, Andreas, thank you all for being here today. Katerina, thank you for putting this panel together, and best of luck, and be well, everyone, and do good work. This recording will be online in a few days or weeks. Stay tuned to the Web2Learn website, web2learn.eu, and the social channels to stay in touch. And best of luck, everyone, and have a great afternoon.